Okay, thanks everybody for being here, and welcome to our second real estate roundtable. We did one, gosh, it was probably 3 months ago that was really successful, and it turned out to be a whole ton of fun. So I think we're going to continue doing these. I think the best part of doing these for me is taking part, as the moderator, is to have input on the topics of conversation and the selection of guests that are going to be involved in it. My goal is to have an engaging topical conversation with guests that I find inspiring, and hopefully, all of you will as well. And I think we've done just that in this. And the topic of our the central topic of this discussion, I think, is really topical at the moment. We're going to talk a lot about green building and the green future, and with everything that's going on with climate change and the initiatives that are being proposed, I think it's all a worthy conversation. So let's jump into it. But first, before we do so, I just want to thank Jesse Williamson and Caroline Nichols for doing everything they do. Frankly, without them, none of this would occur. They've helped with all the technical and content components of it, and securing all of our guests, and they've just done an exceptional job of putting this all together. So thanks to them. So we'll move forward. I'll start out by just giving what my opinion of the real estate market update is, and then we're going to jump into, just to give you a little bit of a path forward. Brian Manning with Guaranteed Rate is going to talk about the lending market and how that looks. And then Jeff Heineman's going to talk with Cottonwood Builders, is going to talk about some of the green building programs that they instill. They've got a really forward-thinking mindset towards green building, and it's a priority to them, and which is much appreciated, and I think is gaining traction. And then Lauren with the Colorado Green Building Guild is going to talk about, and she's got this vast experience. She's an architect. She's also running for city council. And she's I'll go into her credentials when we introduce her, but I think it's a really interesting topic at the moment. So I'll kind of start out with my portion of it. Boulder's market, this has been a very interesting 2 years. Boulder's market has continued to prove to be resilient. It seems that every time there's unrest in parts of our country, whether it be civil unrest, climate change, economic uncertainty, or in this case, a pandemic, more eyes turn to Boulder. And we've seen that perhaps exaggerated over the last 2 years, or since the pandemic began. Largely, our audience is coming from external markets like California, a lot of East Coast, some parts of Florida, which all make perfect sense. It's people seeking lifestyle communities like ours. So that's been a big driver to our market. There's also been quite a bit of internal shuffling, as buyers or homeowners' housing needs have changed as a result of, boomerang kids, or kids going to school at home, or just realigning priorities as uncertainty can tend to do. The story of our market lately largely revolves around inventory. As much as we've been an incredibly strong market, our limited inventory is the variable that's holding back our market from even doing more. I think our inventory is down year to date, or year over year is down about 50%. So that's obviously a significant decline. Our sales, thankfully we've seen a great deal of appreciation. So the overall sales volume has gone up despite our declining inventory and our moderate decline in number of homes sold. Because of the rising inventory, our numbers continue to remain strong. A lot of it is our timing. So due to COVID and the shutdown that occurred at March of last year, our market sort of got out of cycle because we were closed during our peak season, and then all of a sudden the market opened up and sort of the gates opened up, and like I said, more eyes got turned to Boulder. I think what we're seeing lately is our market is more normalizing. It's and
Yes,
and I don't mean normalizing in the sense that I'll wait for someone to mute. I don't mean normalizing in the sense that values are declining or that we're reverting back to prior values. I mean normalizing in the typical market cycle. You know, we tend to see a valley around the holidays and a peak around, around March. That was really shifted during the pandemic. Now, obviously the pandemic's not over, but we've sort of gotten used to our cycle, and we're definitely falling a little bit back into those normal patterns. At the moment, August tends to be a slow month. We've seen that to be the case, although it's been strong. That's continued to be the case. But my expectation looking forward is that we're going to see a bump as we typically do in the fall, and then we'll probably go into a bit of a valley in the towards the holidays. And then, my expectation looking forward is that next spring is going to be a market like this last spring. It'll continue to be as good as it has been. So I think looking forward, short of a national, a major national event, I don't really see any obstacles that would get in the way of our market growth. I think all price points continue to be poised for appreciation. And I expect that to continue for the balance of this year, with obviously the prime time being spring of next year. And then, some of the statistics that we're going to walk through here sort of add punctuation to that. We've sort of come across a time where we've got historically low interest rates. There's just a compounding set of variables that have caused this. But, the spring up until now, we had buyers, houses were selling for as much as 10 to 20% above asking price. That's not universal and not across all price points, but by and large, that's been a true story. And buyers were so desperate to find houses that they were waiving all the typical contingencies that may give them protection. Contingencies like loan condition, survey, appraisal, even inspection was being waived in many favors. There were offers that were being written from buyers that basically said, "You sign the contract, I'll see you at closing." And that has tamed a bit as some of the demand has gone down. Our average price point, which is still always surprising to me, the average closed price is just over $1 million. This second number, the month supply inventory, a typical balanced market has about 4 to 6 months of inventory. Our market has got 0.7 to 1 month of inventory, which just adds punctuation to the fact that it's still, the market greatly favors sellers. So if a seller's at all realistic on their expectations, they're going to be successful in this market. Our active inventory is down 52%. So like I said before, that's really the variable and the central topic of conversation about our market is it's sort of a vicious cycle, because all the sellers are saying, sure, I would sell, but where would I go? So our limited inventory is almost holding up our inventory, but hopefully we'll start to see that normalize a little bit as spring approaches. Average days on the market obviously is going to be lower. It's 27. Realize that the average days to offer, the average days on the market is reflective of the time it takes to close. The average days to offer is probably 3. So that's a notable shift in our market. Lending market. So that's sort of synopsis. That's sort of my conclusion or my summary of the real estate component of it. Obviously, I'm open to any questions, but I'm going to start going into our wonderful guests. So first, just to give a summary on the lending market, Brian Manning with Guaranteed Rate. Brian is a wonderful lender. I've worked with him for many years. He and I have done hundreds of transactions together, and he continues to exceed expectation and just does a fantastic job. So I'm going to open it up to him to talk about the lending component of the market.
Perfect. Can you all hear me okay?
Perfect. Well, Steve, thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I'm in Boulder as well, and I 100% agree with your comments of what you just said about the market there. And one thing I really focus on a lot is just looking forward to what's going to happen with the mortgage markets over, say, the next year or so. I mean, we all, or most of us, know that mortgage rates are at historic lows right now, but really looking forward, what is the impact going to be for us, and what's going to change as far as the markets are concerned. So one thing we just pay a lot of close attention to right now is really going to be the Federal Reserve. So as we got into COVID, the Federal Reserve for a second time, the first time was back in 2008, second time being now in COVID, implemented what's called quantitative easing. So it was their bond buying program. So the purpose of doing this was to add stability in the financial markets and keep rates low. So right now, the Federal Reserve's buying $120 billion a month in bonds. That's a combination of mortgage-backed securities and U.S. Treasuries. And their balance sheet right now is really holding trillions of dollars of these bonds. So something we want to pay attention to going forward is just what the Federal Reserve is doing and what their comments are going to be. And eventually they're going to roll into what's called tapering, which means at some point in time they have to slow down and eventually stop this bond buying and let the markets kind of move on more of an open market condition. So we just need to watch what they're going to do here in the near future, and then also what version of tapering will come into play, because this will have an impact of interest rates going forward. And what I mean by that is, if they just announce a tapering of not buying bonds every month, that's probably not going to be very impactful, because right now the Federal Reserve owns really trillions of dollars of mortgage-backed securities. And anytime someone refinances and pays off a mortgage, or sells a home and pays off a mortgage, they're taking that money and reinvesting it back into the markets right now. So if they just taper out of their monthly bond buying, that probably won't be very impactful. But if they taper out of monthly bond buying and they really start a runoff of their balance sheet, that will be slightly impactful on interest rates. So going forward, if you're just paying attention to the news and you hear about the Federal Reserve and really they're tapering, that's something just to pay attention to, because that will have an impact on interest rates. It's kind of ironic we're doing this today, because this morning the ECB, the European Central Bank, who also had a very similar program in place, they just announced this morning that they're going to start their tapering through their bond buying program. So they're kind of the first in suit right now to pave the way across the world for other countries to do this. So the Federal Reserve will meet again at the end of September. I would say it's unlikely that we'll see an announcement at the end of their September meeting in regards to tapering, but probably by the end of the year, we're going to get some feedback there. So I don't think we're going to see any impact on interest rates in the near future, but going into next year, we're probably going to be something. The second item for us to pay attention to is really just the labor force, employment and unemployment. The U.S. economy right now has 11.9 million people that are receiving unemployment. And as of Labor Day weekend, there was 3 additional benefit packages that were available for people that were on unemployment, and those have expired. So you got 11.9 million people right now receiving unemployment across the U.S., and you have 11 million job openings. So we have not seen any of the impact yet from the 3 benefit programs expiring, but it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with new job hirings and unemployment over the next, say, month to 6 months. One of the reasons why I bring this up is because an impact on interest rates is going to be inflation. And something we have to watch for is what's called wage pressure inflation. So a lot of employers right now can't even hire people, right? They're struggling with the ability to hire people. So if you start to see employers needing to raise wages just to entice employees to come back to work, now you get what's called a wage pressure inflation, because as employers, you're having to pay employees more money to come back to work. So if inflation is introduced to the U.S. economy through this version of wage pressure inflation, that's going to have an impact on interest rates as well. So, you know, definitely kind of uncharted territory we're in right now, because none of us have ever gone through something like this before. So, you know, certainly what's going to happen with the Federal Reserve and employment over the next 4 months to a year is going to be impactful. So we'll just have to wait and see. You know, the topic of today being really green building in Boulder, and then probably just around the US, and how we really help improve upon green building. We do have one loan program as well that's very specific. It's an energy efficient mortgage. So this is for a home that has certified presence of solar or geothermal energy solutions. And then this particular program usually gives you about 1/8% lower interest rate. So it's the only loan program I know right now that's very much focused on energy efficiency solutions. So I'm excited because it's really good to see the mortgage industry start to get into this and really kind of get behind the topic of what we're going to talk about today. I would say my final summary on the mortgage markets would be that the Delta variant and COVID are certainly going to be continually impactful in the U.S. economy. So we're gonna have to wait and see how that goes. Certainly, I would say we're not in a bubble, and I would really say that for many reasons. So that's going to be a separate topic of conversation. Interest rates are amazing right now, and they're going to continue to be at record lows for quite a long time. And definitely, kind of circling back to what Steve said before, interest rates and qualifying are not holding back buyers right now. It's low inventory. Even for myself as a lender, looking at buyers that are purchasing in Boulder in the front range market, that it's not qualifying, it's not interest rates, it's the availability or the lack of availability of homes for sale that are probably holding us back right now. That's the quick update on the mortgage markets, and thank you again for having me.
Thanks, Brian. That's amazing. Every time I do this, I learn something, and it's clear your vast depth of knowledge. It's interesting, one of the things I've often said is within reason, moderate rising of interest rates can actually help the real estate market. And I don't know if you've seen that, Brian, but it almost acts as a stimulus because buyers feel like they need to secure their rate, make their purchase decision now before rates continue to go up. And in a declining market, buyers are often wanting or willing to wait. But with a little bit of upward pressure, that could actually stimulate our market to an extent until it gets out of control.
I would agree. And then you're still going to contend with the low inventory. So even when the pressure is there, I agree with what you said before, that pushing into spring 2022 is going to be a market like we're experiencing right now for everything you just outlined.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Great summary. Okay, so now we'll push forward and get to the central topic of this roundtable. We're going to really talk about green building, and I think we've really got two experts in this field. So let's just jump into that. First, Jeff Heineman is, he's founded Cottonwood Custom Home Builders back in 1995. He's vast experience in the Boulder construction market. But the thing I love and appreciate about them is that they really place an emphasis on green building techniques. So I will let Jeff jump into that. But again, thanks to you, because I really appreciate your being here.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks very much. And it's funny, but I learned something from Brian as well. So that green loan program is something a lot of our clients might be able to take advantage of and be interested in. So that's really good to know. And certainly we would concur with everything you guys said about the low inventory. A lot of our clients are, trying to find a place to move to in Boulder to either remodel or build a new house. And it has not been easy in the last, couple of years for sure. So anyway, my background, I came into construction from a politics background. I ran consumer and environmental protection campaigns for about 8 years out of college. I graduated from CU, but I'm kind of unique because I brought this environmental protection ethic into my construction work, from the very beginning 30 years ago. So, and that it's interesting. Green building has really evolved, right? Green building wasn't even really a term 30 years ago. There was a lot of focus on passive home construction and, homes that heated themselves, like taking advantage of the sun. But, and there was focus on materials. I joke that, 20 years ago, green building was importing bamboo from China, which wasn't very green at all. So the green building has really evolved in the last 20 years significantly. And in Boulder, a lot of that has been from the the architect and contractor side actually pushing the city to adopt more stringent codes. So the Boulder Green Building Guild was formed in 2004. And the purpose of the formation of that group was to push the county and the city to develop more stringent codes to upgrade the building practices in Boulder, because even though Boulder is pretty aware and very environmentally oriented, that was not translating into the construction world. And so there was a big push from the Green Building Guild, a successful push to get Boulder on the cutting edge of environmental sustainable building codes. And that's continued through today. You know, Boulder and Boulder County have much more stringent codes today than the National Energy Conservation Code, which is nationwide. But you know, in the past, a lot of the focus green building was on the individual elements of the house, the materials, whereas today it's much more focused on the house as a system. The building science has evolved tremendously. So now today, you know, the main focus, like the biggest thing that needs to be done right on any construction project is the building envelope in terms of air tightness and really well insulated, high performing windows, and all of that, you know, moisture control, indoor air quality. So a lot of that has really advanced in the last 20 years, whereas, you know, in the past that was not, it wasn't an integrated approach like that. So there's a lot of technology innovations that have evolved in the last few years in terms of mechanical equipment. You know, I think almost all of our projects at the moment are using heat pumps, electric heat pumps for the heating and cooling of the homes. And sometimes those are in conjunction with geothermal. But, you know, the days of having a gas-fired furnace or boiler are really in the past. And that's really important, because if you have a gas hookup and that's your primary source of heat for your house, you're going to be stuck on fossil fuels, you know, for the life of the home. Whereas if you have an electric heat pump, then you're getting electricity off the grid, and the grid, as a lot of people know, is going renewable very quickly because wind and solar have dropped so much in price. So the grid is probably going to be, you know, 75% renewable by 2030. And, you know, relying on electricity from renewable energy is a much greener way to heat and cool your house than having a gas line hookup. And the new code in Boulder is going to force some homes to do that, because to meet the code, you're going to have an electric system, not a gas system. The other thing that's really changed, and that started in 2006, was the energy rating of homes, which a lot of the people know it by the HERS rating. And it's also known as the ERI, the Energy Rating Index. But this has been a huge advance in improving all of the building stock, right? So builders like Cottonwood have been doing green building for many years and doing that well before the codes required it. But the new Energy Conservation Code requires energy ratings of all construction projects. And that is driving, you know, even production home builders that are totally focused on the bottom line, not necessarily focused on, you know, sustainability, but that is, you know, forcing all builders to meet certain basic standards in terms of the insulation, the air sealing, right? The energy rating requires a blower door test on new construction and some remodels. But, you know, having to meet that, it requires duct blast testing. So the energy rating score of a house and that requirement is really driving much higher level of construction than was in the past. But which is really like I said, the building science is what has really changed and evolved, and that's all the focus now is on the building science. So another, you know, major focus of Cottonwood is deconstruction and recycling. And we were doing deconstruction long before the code requires it. The code in Boulder now requires it. To a certain level, Boulder County actually requires all demolition to be done by hand. But taking a house apart piece by piece and recycling all of the components is a huge part of what we do and believe in. I took a green building course a few years ago, and 40% of all the landfill waste in the United States is construction debris, which is kind of a staggering number. And for us, it also saves money for our clients because recycling is far cheaper than hauling trash to the landfill. Landfill in our area is actually really expensive. So, but we start even before the deconstruction, so we recycle all the wood, all the metal, all the concrete as we're deconstructing a house. But even before that, we work with our demo subs, and there's an organization in Boulder called Resource, and there's also a Habitat for Humanity Restore store in Longmont. But all of the cabinets, all of the doors, trim, hardwood flooring, anything that is of high enough quality to be reused, we donate for a charitable contribution for our clients, and that gets repurposed and reused in other people's houses or projects around the Boulder area. So it's a great way to keep things out of the landfill, and even better than chipping up clean wood into mulch, even better would be to have stuff that gets reused in other homes. So we even have a kitchen reseller for some of our projects where they will actually come in and photograph the kitchen and then measure it and then market that and then actually sell that kitchen to a buyer who wants to use it in their future project, and they will actually come and pay us to take away the cabinets, which is even better than recycling because we're getting paid and our owners save the cost of doing that work. But anyway, we divert 75 to 85% of all the waste and deconstruction on our projects. We divert from the landfill, and it really just takes the mentality and the effort to make that happen. And even though the code requires recycling in Boulder, you can drive around the city and see many, many dumpsters on many projects that are just filled with cardboard and wood and metal that could easily be recycled. And those contractors are just not caring or putting the effort into it to divert those things. And it's really hard for the city to enforce that. So another change in green building has been the focus on buying locally and sourcing things locally, which is really, one of the greenest approaches. Is you can, buy stone from Lyons or buy beetle kill pine from, the dead trees in Colorado. It's a really great way to make the house as green as possible. Water efficiency. Anyone that's been following the state of the Colorado River recently knows that we are in very uncharted territory as far as the future of our water supplies and the declining snowpack. So it's really important that houses are very efficient and use as little water as possible, which is indoors and outdoors. So we put a big emphasis on that, and our plumbers are following the very best practices in terms of, the water lines in the house are kind of like a tree of the main trunk lines, and then the lines feeding off of that going to a sink or a toilet are only as big as they need to be for that particular fixture. All of our houses have recirc lines for the hot water so that you don't run the water for several minutes waiting for hot water. So, if you magnify that times, hundreds of projects in Boulder, over time, that's going to make a huge difference. And, focus on water resilient landscaping and really efficient irrigation systems are also something that all of our subcontractors and designers try to shoot for. anyway, so indoor air quality is an issue because the houses are so tight that they need fresh air, which is now a code requirement, but we have really advanced systems for how we can bring in fresh air and temper that air and distribute it around the house so that there's no indoor air quality problems. And anyway, and then another, this isn't necessarily green building, but another really important thing in the Boulder area is fire resistant construction. We know from the 2013, or excuse me, the 2010 4 Mile fire, and then last year's fire north of Boulder, that houses that are built with fire resistant methods and practices can survive a forest fire, whereas a house that is not built to those standards can catch on fire very quickly. And once that happens, even if the house is only partially damaged, it's lost. So really important to build to resist our environmental conditions in this area, which we pretty much do on every project, even if it's not technically in the wildfire zone. So anyway, I think that's kind of an overview of the current practices that we're performing. The future of green building, I can see a day where houses have batteries so they can be off grid and produce all of their own power and be completely self-sufficient. Concrete is a big fossil fuel carbon sink that we have not developed good alternatives for, but I think that will be in the future. And I think that we will continue to see, more and more solar and more geothermal as the codes require that, and as the costs, show that homeowners will save money by doing those things. So I will turn it back over to Steve and Lauren for.
Thanks so much. That's so interesting. I feel like I have to convince my daughter to give up her 20-minute showers. Next up, I'd like to introduce Lauren. And if we can just go to the next. Lauren Folkerts, she's an architect. She's super active in the community. She's president-elect of the Colorado Green Building Guild and chair of the City of Boulder Design Advisory Board. Again, I think she gives a unique perspective, especially that she's politically active within the city and that she's running for city council. So I'm sure that she would be more than willing to have conversation with anybody about those initiatives. But just know that we all really appreciate your role and your green perspective. And Jeff said something yesterday that I thought was really interesting, is that, when buyers, speaking in my arena, when buyers are looking at houses, it's really easy to see a sub-zero refrigerator or a pretty door or nice paint colors or a nice design. And sometimes the efficiency of a house is under-recognized. And I always say, when you walk into a house that's been really well constructed, designed, with a super tight envelope, after a little bit of time in the house, you really feel it. You feel it's quiet, it's comfortable, it heats and cools more efficiently and better and quicker and even temperature. So it's funny, I think it's something that buyers, that the mindset of buyers should begin to shift, because you can always buy a new refrigerator, but you can't change the envelope of your house. And Jeff had pointed that out in a conversation yesterday. And I think that's something to be really mindful of. So anyway, let's jump to Lauren and let's take it away.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate your intro and putting this all together. So I'm just gonna kind of go back again and then go forward. So I'm talking about some of the new and evolving ideas around what sustainable building is today and what it might look like in the future. I'm going to touch on where our codes currently are and what changes we can expect to see in the future, and what to do in a world whose rules are always changing. It's one of the things we love about Boulder, right? So like Jeff mentioned, we're in a race against time. By 2050, we need to reduce carbon emissions by 80 to 90% globally to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. For thousands of years, we've been building buildings with keen regard for nature and tuned into the natural phenomena, weather, all of that, local conditions. But in the 20th century, with the rapid shifts in scientific advancements, we've decided to let technology free us from these conventional restraints. And any unintended consequences that have come up, we've answered with more engineering and more power. And this has led us to where we are today. Our buildings right now are using too much energy. They have too many toxins, and they're out of step with nature and our current environmental predicament. To build for the future, we need to look both forward and backward. We need to combine new technology and traditional building techniques, because buildings are a big part of both the problem and the solution. Their construction and operation is one of our leading sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. As Jeff mentioned, in Boulder, we have some of the strictest energy codes in the country. We will continue to see our HERS and ERI targets continue to lower, and the city is certainly going to continue to push for the electrification of more buildings. Boulder is also working on updates to our climate action plan. And these updates are going to be big. They're fundamental changes regarding the impacts that we're measuring and the goals that we're trying to
Michael,
as a community.
hey, looks like you tried to call me a little while ago.
The updated climate action plan will measure not only the greenhouse gases produced from goods and transportation within city limits, but also the emissions produced outside of city limits for goods and services that we utilize. This is likely to more than double our current reported emissions. Given Boulder's contributions to climate change with our high emissions rate per capita and our capacity to engage in climate action because of our high GDP and our highly engaged community, the city has set ambitious targets that encompass all major greenhouse gas emissions to become net zero within a time frame that will increase the global chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. To do this, we're talking about some pretty ambitious targets: 100% renewable energy by 2030, a 40% reduction in embodied energy by 2031, achieving zero operational emissions from new and existing buildings by 2040, and ensuring 25% of high emissions building materials can be reused, requiring new construction to be offset, to offset the embodied emissions, and requiring a building materials inventory for all new construction by 2023. These are aggressive targets, and at this point, it's unclear how the city can even legally regulate all of the areas. But one thing is for certain, and that's that we should expect to continue to see increasing challenging sustainability targets and to push for significant changes in the building industry. So we all want to do the right thing, but with these goals and rules constantly changing, how do we stay ahead of the curve? How do we anticipate the future trends and requirements? I'm going to lay out these 5 principles that I think are pretty fundamental. There's no real magic in it, but it's about returning to these historic principles and ideas. And the more we realize these, the simpler the solutions become. A well-designed building incorporates these smart decisions instead of relying on technology. There's always going to be a certain need for mechanical systems and sort of the cutting edge, but that should play a secondary role. We don't need to reinvent the way we build, but we do need to focus on the fundamental principles and reintegrate new old habits. So the first one I'm going to talk about is lowering the embodied carbon. Operational energy is so important, and it's great that Boulder's energy code has focused on reducing it. But in the time scale of 2050, which is essential for our civilization to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, We need to understand that most of the carbon emitted, 80% of it, is in the making of the buildings, not in their operations. One major issue is that many of the strategies for reducing operational energy require an increase in embodied energy. Like compounding interest, embodied carbon avoided at the start of a building's life will have a greater beneficial impact on the emissions saved over the lifetime of the building. Because the embodied carbon in the structure of a building can account for as much as half of the building's total carbon emissions, reusing and renovating structures when possible is one of the best things we can do. We also need to minimize waste, source new materials that are produced with less energy intensive processes and have a higher recycled content. And finally, we need to incorporate more plant content because plants remove CO2 from the atmosphere through photosynthesis and store it in the plant. Because they do this, when we use plant material in our buildings, we turn our buildings into carbon storage. This is one of the easiest and most straightforward types of carbon capture techniques that we have. This is again another area that our codes don't touch on yet, but as I mentioned with our updated climate action plan, they will. By building with plant-based materials, we can turn our cities into huge carbon banks. Using wood and other plant-based materials, we can break the carbon cycle because unlike forests, where trees grow and then die and decompose, buildings lock in carbon for the long term, as long as we don't tear them down. Another area that the code doesn't yet address, but will, and is receiving more attention on the consumer side because of the growing number of people experiencing multiple chemical sensitivities, is the toxicity of construction materials. Not only is this important for residents, but it's also really important for workers on the job site, workers in factories, and for our planet itself. There are a lot of tools to help us make more informed decisions about what is safe to be incorporated into a building and what isn't. The Greenpeace plastics pyramid is a newer one. We also have the Living Building Red List, Declare labels, Precautionary List, Healthy Building Networks, and the Pharos Project. Eliminating toxic materials is important, and beyond that, we should look again to more natural products and ones that require less processing and ideally can be found locally. Returning to the traditional building technologies and materials of our area. Straw bale is a great example of this. Straw is a relatively renewable material that sucks CO2 out of the atmosphere. And other examples include wood fiber, hemp, wool, cellulose insulation, timber structural material, and lime, plaster, and adobe finishes. Beyond being a better choice for the environment, these natural materials can also be a healthier choice for indoor air quality. They can absorb pollutants and help buffer humidity levels when properly selected. They also have no VOCs. Jeff talked about this a lot. When we build a new home or have a significant remodel or addition project, it's important to make sure that we are investing in the building envelope. This is the piece that is the hardest to upgrade in the future, and using quality materials is not only better for the environment, but it can make a big impact on the quality and performance of the building over time. While plastic insulations have been designed to meet the criteria of our energy codes that they measure for performance, they often have hidden pitfalls. These pitfalls vary by type of material and manufacturer, but these issues range from low performance in extreme temperatures, reduced performance over time, and a high flammability. This graph here shows the increased insulation performance of a wood fiber board compared to XPS of a similar R value, due specifically to its thermal buffering capacity. So there you see the diurnal shifts and how the wood fiber board is keeping the highest temperature lower during the day. This is an area where hiring architects and contractors who have extensive expertise with sustainable practices is crucial. Even in a dry environment, managing humidity and executing tricky details is incredibly important to the performance of these homes over time. Now I can get to that. We need to build for a 100-year time frame. We want to, if we're looking to interrupt the carbon cycle by trapping carbon in our buildings, this is only possible when buildings are preserved and maintained, which means on top of all of this, it's crucial that we focus on good design, beauty, and delight to make sure that our buildings are loved and preserved for generations. So I know that was a lot really quickly. Thank you guys so much for following along. And if you'd like to see some of these ideas in practice, please consider joining us for the Boulder Green Home Tour. It's an event I've enjoyed helping organize for the past 3 years, and it's always fun to get to talk to architects and homeowners about what these buildings have meant for them and the quality of their lives. All of these issues are really important to me, both personally and professionally. Climate change and our affordable housing crisis are two of the main issues that have motivated me to run for city council. And if those resonate with you, I'd encourage you to go to my website, find out more, and please reach out to me if you have any questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Lauren. That's amazing. Again, I feel like I continue to learn from you guys, so that I really appreciate it. Okay, so before we go into a little bit of a question and answer thing, at the end of all of these, we do a little charitable push, and this quarter's charitable organization is the Arbor Day Foundation. I felt that was relevant to the conversation. And also I learned from my dear climate scientist friend that the vast majority of carbon absorption from trees is done during the early life of those trees. So a big sustainable forest that's mature doesn't have the same level of absorption as new growth trees. So it's perhaps more important than ever that we invest in our forests and our trees and the planting of new trees. So we have done this QR code that if you feel so compelled, please just hold up your phone to it and it'll take you to the donation section, and you can do so. And I will do so right after our meeting. So I guess I'll open it up to some questions. I'll start with questions. And this is directed to Lauren and Jeff, whoever feels like answering it. But for those of us that aren't building new homes, but have homes that have been around for a while, and probably weren't built to the same, or certainly weren't built to the same environmental standards as we're employing today, what are sort of the low-hanging fruit items if we wanted to improve our environmental position or environmental consciousness in our houses? What are those sort of low-hanging fruit items that you see that homeowners like me could employ in our houses that obviously are environmentally conscious?
I mean,
Go ahead, Lauren.
I think getting an overall picture of the house is really important. You know, there's a kind of energy raters and people like that can help you identify if there's any really big issues that need to be addressed right away. Beyond that, I think that you know, doing exterior insulation is always a really good one. Window upgrades and replacements, depending on, you know, how old your windows are. And then the mechanical systems are sort of, those three are my first go-to targets.
Great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You can hire independent energy rater to come out and do an assessment on your house and, you know, do a blower door test and find, you know, potential major weaknesses in the existing home. But I think the other, you know, a lot of homeowners in Boulder, you know, are remodeling and upgrading their homes. And when you do that, take advantage of that opportunity. When you're putting in a new kitchen or redoing your bathroom, don't just focus on the finishes, the cabinets and the tile and the countertops, but focus on any area of the house that you're touching, really upgrading that and doing the insulation right and getting the air sealing right. If you're replacing windows, pick high performing windows and install them correctly. Because a lot of the building envelope, which is really the key, it's really just attention to detail and making sure it's put together right. Yeah, if you're redoing the exterior, putting exterior insulation on it, like Lauren mentioned, is really a huge improvement in performance to have that thermal break on the entire outside of the house. But you also have to be careful, because if you don't install that correctly and do the waterproofing correctly, you can actually end up with moisture problems instead of better performance.
And then I just have one more question before we turn to others. Boulder is generally a progressive, receptive community, towards progressive thought. What are you seeing outside of Boulder, and how can we improve the awareness of green building in some markets that may tend to be less progressive and less accepting of green building techniques?
Well, Lauren can comment on this too, but I mean, building codes are a huge key, because not everyone is going to do it, voluntarily or even know what's possible. So the evolution in the building codes is really important, and I know that is ongoing. And I think Lauren touched on some of the things that will be the focus of future codes. Incentives, the tax credits for the renewable energy were set to expire next year. They had been declining, but fortunately in the stimulus bill last December, those got reestablished back up to 26%. And giving people a financial incentive to put in renewable energy is really generating a lot of improvements. But I think future incentives, if people had a financial savings or a tax credit to build a house that performed above a certain energy rating level, or if production builders, could get tax credits for building majority of their houses over a certain level, I think things like that would have a major impact. But things like that nationally would require Congress to actually get something accomplished, and I don't know that we can count on that. So
yeah.
I think it's also about a culture shift, right? Like there's more and more agreement and consensus around the urgency of our climate crisis. And so I think that naturally we are going to see more attention in communities Boulder and beyond, but also talking about the additional benefits. I think it is about not only that you can save the planet, but that, it can make your life better too. That it's about the quality of life, increased performance and the enjoyment of the home.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It looks like Michelle has a question. If you want to unmute yourself. I see a hand raised. Or is that not the case? Or if anybody else has a question, please feel free to chime in.
I had a question. I was curious if you could, in a remodeling of a home, take a home that has a traditional gas furnace and replace it with the heat pump system you were describing, or does that have to be done during a new build?
It depends on the design of the duct system, but yes, in many cases, I think that you would be able to use the existing ductwork and replace it with a heat pump system, and greatly upgrade the performance of the equipment.
Got it. Cool. Thank you.
So unless there's any other questions, I think that kind of concludes our conversation. So I just want to say thanks to Jeff, Lauren, Brian, Jesse, and Caroline for putting it together, and all of you for being here. It's much appreciated, and I hope you got out of this what I feel like I got out of it. So we'll see in another quarter with another one of these.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you guys for having us.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
And I'll just make one more plug. You're going to see this on, we're going to circulate this on social media and in different platforms. So if you feel compelled to share, I know this topic is important to a lot of people. If you feel compelled to share the conversation with anybody else, don't be reluctant. Look for it on those social channels and share it with those that you feel might be interested. And that's great. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Steve. and
Thank you,
everyone.
Steve.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.